Thanks for inviting me to the conference. I don't know if it was because we were sponsored that we got the spot, but my name is Indran Naick. As Theo mentioned, I am the CTO for ecosystem development within IBM, and I'm actually a certified IT architect, so I'm the one that makes up the plans, and then it's developers like yourself that make it happen. And I'm also an IBM master inventor. Just a little bit more about myself. I graduated from WITS, worked for IBM in South Africa for about 8-9 years, moved to the US for 14 years, and I'm back in South Africa for the last 2 years. And just an interesting fact, did you know that Texas is half the size of South Africa? We're twice as big as they are. I was stationed in a cool place called Austin, Texas, so I can speak a little Texan. I can say y'all or water. But coincidentally, one of the first conferences that I presented at in the US was the first O'Reilly conference on Java, where we presented a paper on migrating from client-server to what we called e-business applications, but it was really, migrating from all those heavyweight RPG and mainframe applications to web applications, and using all the design patterns that we could think of to try to front-end those back-end applications. So the world hasn't changed that much, as I'm going to talk about cloud today. So there were 3 things that I wanted to focus on, and this might be slightly controversial, but we'll keep it light. I thought there was no worse slot than talking before lunch, but I found the new worst slot, which is talking after lunch at the last slot before everybody wants to go home on a Friday afternoon and drink, including me, because I left home at 3 o'clock this morning trying to get to Cape Town on time. And by the way, that website, the Java website map is incorrect, right? I found that out driving to the VNA Waterfront headquarters, where they told me there's no Java conference here. And then all the roads changed here, so I thought it was like a conspiracy to make sure I don't get here. Never. But I persisted. And there were 3 things really I want to focus on. Is why is cloud important to us, and why do we think also as a corporation cloud is important? The second thing is Java and cloud. What are a few of the things that we need to start thinking about as we refactor applications and move them over to cloud, or how do we think about them in the cloud? And the third one is, now that cloud has become so pervasive, does it also factor into all the other things that we do? When we do development, is it going to factor into our development processes? Are we going to start developing on the cloud for the cloud, rather than just leveraging the cloud as a platform for hosting our services? Now, I'm going to make sure that this is not an advertising spot, so I'm not going to talk too much about our products and services, but I'll talk about one platform specifically that we call Bluemix, because it's slightly different to the traditional cloud platform, and I'll reference that in our DevOps platform. But we've got competitors, and they worthy competitors, which includes Amazon and Microsoft and Heroku and all the others. So, I'm not going to try to differentiate between us and them, but really when you consider our platform, just consider it as I'm talking about every other cloud platform as well, even though we've got the best one. But when we talked about applications, when we look at applications really from having dealt with hundreds of enterprises around the globe, what we're seeing is the shift of what we're calling systems of engagements to from systems of record to systems of engagement. What that means is that in the past, when we developed applications for most enterprises, it was really around recording information about your customers, what they were doing, how much money, what their details were, information about your employees, just records. We were keeping records, CRM records, HR, there were database, ERP systems, and really all of those systems are focused around that. Now, when we look at people developing around this space here, any new developments they do provides them very little return on investment. You can only make a system that good, and we've been doing systems of record forever. One of the oldest systems of record is, what's that airline booking system, Sabre? And they still haven't modernized that application, because it's just a system of record. All it does is keep records of flights, where they're going to and from. What we're seeing is where more benefit comes in is in systems of engagement, where we take information that we have in those records and build systems that engage us as human beings. when we build things around Facebook or Twitter or collecting information about our products and services. So when we build these new types of systems, they need a lot more collaboration. They don't exist within our enterprise completely. They exist with information that is contained both inside and outside our enterprise, which lends those systems on the left to being more appropriate for being developed on the cloud, because now not only are you leveraging information within your enterprise, but you need to combine that with systems and information outside your enterprise. If you want to do that, you need a place where all of us can play, and that place is cloud, because that information has to coexist in a space that both of us have. Now, I'm sure most of you know this, the three different, or the predominant cloud models. Anyone unfamiliar with infrastructure as a service, platform as a service, or software as a service? So just one or two hands in the room. Just the analogy that we normally use is infrastructure as a service is as like a house. You buy a virtual machine in the cloud. If the lawn grows too long, you still got to cut the lawn. If the lights go out, you still got to go and change the light bulb. So you've got the virtual machine, but you've got to maintain it. You've got to maintain all the software on the virtual machine. The platform as a service is the one that I'm going to talk a little bit more about, because that's a little different. And this is like getting an apartment. You move into the apartment, you bring your clothes, you bring your furniture. But if anything goes wrong with the apartment, you get the landlord to fix it. Right? So we're going to talk about IBM's Bluemix here, which is basically we the landlord. We'll fix everything for you. You just bring your code and you bring your data. And then software as a service is like a hotel room. You go in, you use whatever services you want, you get up the next morning and you leave. Pay for the room before you leave. So those are the predominant services. I mean, there's a lot of gray area between the two, because you'll see vendors provide you with a virtual machine, and they'll pre-configure the virtual machine, and they'll call it platform as a service. But they're slightly different in the way they're architected, and there's a couple of different models that I use in being able to provide that for you. But we believe that cloud is also specifically relevant to us in Africa. But before I go into why that it is, has anyone seen this infographic before? Did you know that we could fit all of North America, China, most of Europe, and most of Asia on the continent of Africa? We're the second largest continent. We also have the largest amount of precious metals. We have more biodiversity on our continent than any other continent in the world. We'll have the most young working population in a few years. Which means that for companies like IBM, Africa represents huge opportunity. We've developed 2 of our research labs in Africa. The first one was in Kenya. The second one is going to be at WITS. It's around developing solutions for Africa, in Africa, by Africans, right? Because the belief is that only we can solve our problems, because only we have an intimate knowledge of our problems. Because we have problems. We contribute to the lowest GDP in the world. We have the highest infant mortality rate. We have low literacy rates in the world. But all of those are opportunities for innovation. So I don't want to go into that scare tactic a little further, building on the scare tactic. But don't you guys feel now comfortable that when it comes to security, maybe we got the edge when it comes to hijacking in your car and house breakings, but on internet security, the whole world's in the same place as us, right? Richard? But as far as Africa goes, the reason we think cloud is specifically relevant to Africa, because we share one thing in common with the Asians. We don't use cloud to mitigate costs. When you look at the Europeans or the Americans, they look at what does it cost me to maintain my own data center? Okay, can I rent it cheaper on the cloud? So they look at it purely from a cost-benefit analysis. What the Asians and the Africans are doing is that we look at cloud as a mechanism for rapid expansion, right? So we come from a completely different base. It's almost like the same reason we can adopt cell phones quicker than cell phone adoption in the US. When I moved to the US about 16 years ago, I was surprised. There were hardly people with cell phones there, because everyone could find a landline. There was always a call box nearby, so you never found that you needed a cell phone. By the way, I still, 3 years ago when I left the US, I still write checks in the US. How many of you have written a check recently? Who's written a check in the last 2 years?
I live in the US too.
So just the two of us have written a check in the last 2 years, right? They still write, they still use checks, which means that technology adoption doesn't go, I mean, certain traits don't go away quickly. The fact that we don't have data centers, or we didn't have reliable data centers except for those huge enterprises, means it's a good thing. It might have not been seen as a good thing previously, but now it's a good thing, because what happens is we can mitigate local risks and challenges. Of course, Eskom's the best example to use here, right? Your server's not going to go down when it's in Boksburg somewhere and they're having a blackout, right? Because there's another server that's in Dublin or in New York or in one of those other places. It also lowers the barrier to entry for entrepreneurs. Now, my team specifically works with developers, entrepreneurs, and startups. And when you look at what happens with entrepreneurs when they're doing development, they all have these great ideas. They'll tell you about stuff that you haven't dreamed of before. And one of the big barriers to entry is really expertise and cost, right? Usually expertise. But when it comes to cloud, we have a lot of that expertise either as software or as services, or like those REST services. They all become available to those entrepreneurs. It levels the playing fields for developing and developed countries. Now, it's not the fact that you've got a competitor in the US that can stand up 50 machines at lower cost than you can, or because they've got better infrastructure, you can do exactly the same. The fourth one is that we no longer just become a place where people sell stuff to us. Now we want to sell our stuff to them, right? As Africans, we can produce great quality software. Believe it or not, we've got lots of entrepreneurs in Africa that are selling stuff across Europe and across lots of the emerging geos. We had a company in Kenya that we work with called Mode, and what Mode did was give low-cost loans to people. And what happened is the way you paid off the loan is every time you recharged your phone, a portion of whatever the recharge was used to pay off your loan. Right? Now, Mode has a 98 or 99% loan repayment rate. They have a 1% default rate. Who works in a bank here? There isn't a bank in the country here that has a repayment rate anywhere close to that. Right? So, I have, when I worked with my team in the US, I worked all across India, China, Western Europe, and North America. I couldn't work in South America, but because I needed a visa every time I went there with my South African passport. But I worked in most of those countries, and we compare really well against any other place when it comes to ideas. Right? Our big problem was that we never wanted to tell, we don't want to collaborate. We've got other issues, but we have no issue when it comes to talent. We have no issue when it comes to capability. It's just execution. But cloud also lowers the barrier for many of us in any of these areas. So we see innovation as the new currency in IBM. The reason we're reaching out to developers specifically is because it's not enterprises that are going to build these new systems of record that are going to change the world. It's going to be entrepreneurs like yourself or developers in the field that are going to build these new cool apps. They're going to sell those apps into enterprises. We want to influence the developers because we want the enterprises to buy our stuff. Right? We need to get to the developers. We need to get to the entrepreneurs. So we build cloud platforms and cloud capability to be able to do that. Now, we started off with everyone else with infrastructure as a service as our cloud platform. We purchased a company in Dallas, Texas called SoftLayer, which I'll talk a little bit more about. But basically, what you get is virtualization, server, storage, networking. And what we've done since then is we've created this product called Bluemix, which is, how many of you have used Heroku before, platform as a service? We've got a few hands in the room. But basically what we do is we build that apartment complex. And then that apartment complex, what we do is we also put an operating system on there. We also put whatever middleware you need, and we also put whatever runtime you want onto the platform. And we can do that really, really quickly based on this new operating structure that I'll talk about. Now, the cool thing about this is that this platform as a service that we have has got enterprise capabilities, because we noticed that enterprises couldn't just live on the public cloud. In fact, South African enterprises will tell you about POPI and the fact that they can't put information in another country, and they have lots of issues with the way we do data. But so what we had to do was we had to be able to provide 3 different cloud capabilities. Basically, the ability for you to be able to have an apartment in our complex, which is, we've got so many data centers around the world, so you can get an apartment in any one of our complexes. But if an enterprise wanted, we could build you your own apartment complex. You pick a country, we'll build an apartment complex for you, and all of your stuff is there. But if you really wanted to, we'll build your apartment complex on your property, and that gives you the capability to do cloud in what we call public, dedicated, or local. And the platform basically provides you all this capability. But most important in the platform is that we wanted to make sure that it was completely flexible, that you could use any dev tooling that you wanted, or you could get access to the services. Now I'm going to jump out of advertising mode, right, and go back into why is cloud important. Please, if anyone asks you, don't tell them I went so quickly out of advertising mode. I get paid by this company. But the way most of these cloud platforms work is that they provide you with the flexibility to do it where you want to do it, right? The key thing about cloud that we think is really critical and that gives you the ability to do more is this ability to extend your capabilities using all these APIs out there. Now, there was a presentation earlier about REST services. You've got a catalog of services with capabilities that you don't want to sit and develop. As an entrepreneur, there's so much stuff that you can use out there that you might not want to develop, but just take and extend your application into. So this is really key. This is what makes your application development really not increases your productivity, but increases your capability, because now you're not just talking about your application, but your application being able to talk to another application. You've got all the ability to integrate with any of the APIs, just like you normally do, but being able to do it through a simple interface makes it much easier, and then being able to integrate into anything. But I'm going to stop here. I just want to show you, some of what you can do. And again, I'm not touting the platform as much as I'm going to tell you that you can do this on any platform. I have, this is what you'll see when you log on to Bluemix. It's very similar to what you'll see when you log on to a platform like Heroku as well. They have these things called boilerplates. I'll just run through this very quickly. You've got boilerplates, then you've got runtimes. You can choose between Java, Node.js, Go, PHP, Ruby on Rails, Sinatra. You can, for each one of these, you can go and build your own. So it's like it's based on open source Cloudfoundry. So there's a bunch of build packs out there that if you wanted to, you could go and do your own based on Tomcat or any of the other open source projects. These are all the services that you have access to now. How many of you have heard of Watson? Quite a few of you, about half of you. Watson is IBM's cognitive computing platform. It's not a machine learning platform. It's a computer that understands natural language and can ingest natural language and make decisions based on what it knows. So for example, one example where they've used Watson is they fed Watson all the medical textbooks in the world, all the oncology reports, everything, and they use Watson as an advisor to a doctor who's treating a patient with cancer to tell the doctor what might be possible courses of treatment based on what Watson knows. Because not every doctor read every piece of paper out there. But there's a bunch of mobile services, a bunch of DevOps services, web and application services, database services, analytics services. It goes on. And all of these services are not IBM's, right? About half of them are IBM's, about a third are open source, and the rest are from third-party companies. And if you have a service, you can add it into Watson. You can add it into Bluemix. But basically, if you want to, with these boilerplates, they are typical applications. Your base Java application usually consists of a application server and a database, right? In this case here, I can put up a boilerplate that has an application server and a NoSQL database, and I'll give it a name. And because this is supposed to be like a magic trick, you can give me a name from the audience so that I'm not faking it. There's a, can I put a 2, 3 random number type thing in there? Or should I end it with a letter so it's more secure? So basically what Bluemix is doing now is it's setting up a virtual machine, it's installing the application server, and it's setting up the database, and it's going to also deploy a sample application for me at the same time. Now, technically, how long would you assume this would take you? A couple of hours, a day or two if you normally did it, right? Yes. 6 months to get the server if you're working in IBM or any other enterprise. And if you wanted the domain name, because you want the application to be accessible immediately on the internet, it's going to take you even longer, right? But right now what it's doing, it's already set up the virtual machine, it's staging the application, and it should have this thing done in about 3 minutes. Right, in about 3 minutes it's got the application done, and it's also telling me as a developer, I can go down here and I can have it look at some context-sensitive documentation. So because I'm using a NoSQL database, and it's going to tell me that I can go and look at docs that's specifically related to the services that I chose, and I can link any of those, any more services, and get more context-sensitive documentation. Now, why that's cool for developers is because you don't want to read everything about everything, because you know software engineering is it's harder than hardware engineering. Those hardware guys are like doctors. You develop a piece of hardware now, it lasts a long time, and they don't have to learn stuff every week. You know, we've got, I don't know, when I graduated from WITS, we were using Pascal. And since then, there's been like 100 programming languages later that we've got to keep up with, so they don't really have to work as hard as us. So there's a lot of stuff happening. Now my app is up and running already, so I can go and click on the app. And if you're on a browser right now, you should be able to get to this app right now. So it's a sample app, and what this app does is that I can upload files and organize them in a database, a bunch of favorites files. Now if I like, what we've done is we've created tons of apps on GitHub. What you can just do is import the apps into Bluemix, run them, look at them. If you like them, go back, change them, and modify them. Oh. So if anyone wants to go to the URL, you can have a look at it now. So in under 5 minutes, you can demo a sample app, which means that your ability to innovate and create an app just to show somebody, is this what you're looking for? Would you like to have a look at it? Now, if you go back into the dashboard from Bluemix, I can go and have a look at the overview of the app. And what I can do right now is I can go and add Git. So it'll export the code, the sample code that's in the app, to a Git repository. And it'll allow me then to be able to modify the code, which I can then push directly back into Bluemix. But there's other features in here, because I can create additional instances of the app, I can increase the memory, I can estimate the cost of this app on a monthly basis. But from an entrepreneur's point of view, what we're looking at is how quickly can we get you and your idea up and running, right? We know it's probably not going to meet Richard's standards of being secure and stuff, but they're going to hack into a sample on our cloud, not something within your enterprise. Does anyone have any questions? Yes. There at the back. Does all the subscriptions? Okay, so all of the plans here, and again, I'm supposed to be pushing Bluemix, but you'll see the same thing with Heroku or any of our competitors' platforms. They follow a freemium model. That means you can at least try it for free, but if you use a lot of it, then you start paying for it, right? See, which is really nice, because then it makes sure that you use the best services, and only services that actually stand up there are the ones that are really good ones. So, if I did the add git, what it'll do is it'll go and create the git repository for me, and then I can go into git and go and do whatever I need to do to be able to do that. So let's just. So from a cloud perspective, what I can do now is I can really go in quickly, create a Java application. I've got some templates to work with. I can put the application out there. I can test it. What that does for me is basically reduce my deployment time. That whole runtime, I can put the application server in there, I can put a database in there, and every time that database needs to be updated, IBM is going to do it for you, or Heroku is going to do it for you. We're going to update the middleware, we're going to manage that stack. We really want you as a developer to focus on your app and your data, right? And we're going to give you a whole bunch of services that you can innovate around. I'll show you some of the cool Watson services if you're nice to me. But so you can do more with less. Maybe it's going to be less than $1.68 for that instance to be able to do something. But you can do everything you want to do. You can develop, test, run on the service, and I'll show you how the DevOps services fit into that. Now, when you're thinking about doing Java on the cloud versus Java on your local service, typically in an enterprise, you took a machine-centric point of view. You looked at a tiered architecture where you had your client tier, and then you had your database tier and your application server tier. When you do it on a cloud, you're really taking more an application-centric view of your application. What's going to happen is you're probably going to take your application and break it up into lots of small pieces, and you're going to pull the application together where pieces are sitting on various containers. Those containers and the way we deploy those applications are very different to your enterprise deployment mechanisms. So it's going to differ because when you use something like Bluemix, depending on whether you're using a private or a public instance, you're going to have to change your deployment characteristics. You have almost as much flexibility. The way Bluemix works is it's based on something called Cloudfoundry, and this is the Cloudfoundry kernel. This is basically what we call the operating system for the cloud. I'm not going to go into everything here, but the key pieces are you've got your routing mechanism that tells your client how to get to your application. You've got your authentication mechanism that's going to help you manage your application when you're logging into the web interface for building your application. And then the key part there is this place called the application execution, the DEA, the droplet execution environment. It's not the Drug Enforcement Agency. You thought it might tie into that freemium model where you give you a little until you're hooked onto it, and then you can't stop taking it. But we also have some of the housekeeping mechanisms at the bottom, the services and messaging. So the way the virtual machines work is they are not like your traditional virtual machines that you are like your VMware virtual machines, right? With VMware, you create a machine, it's got a full operating system. This uses Linux virtual machine capability, the built-in, which is why I was able to do that in under 3 minutes, right? I set up this virtual machine. Within that virtual machine is a container. I put the framework, then the Java runtime exists within that framework, and then I put my application in there. And I can have multiple containers within the droplet execution environment. And I can have multiple environments so that not every application is sitting in the same environment. So if it drops, I know I've got other instances in other containers. Now this concept of a build pack, because that's going to be like the structure that you use to contain your application. A build pack contains all your runtimes, your libraries that you're going to use that's going to sit in your droplet execution environment. So depending on what you want in there, you can create your own build pack and then deploy those build pack based on your application. Whether you're using it for testing or for running, you can define your build pack the way you want to. The service structure of Cloudfoundry or Bluemix or Heroku is similar. We can have one application tied to multiple services or multiple applications tied to the same server. So it's a one-to-many, one-to-one. So if, for example, I've got a database back here, I can have multiple applications talk to the same database, irrespective. The other thing that you're going to see big in the way you structure applications in Bluemix is that you're going to follow what we call microservices versus monolithic services. When you knew that you owned all the infrastructure, you could have long-running services, you could have services that was seen as one single logical executable. But what you can happen with your cloud, when you put your application in the cloud, you're going to have lots of small services, and many of those services are not going to run on the same machine. Lots of those services are not even going to be written in the same language, right? So you're going to be looking at, using a standard interface. Any questions so far before we go on? There's a question here.
What's the difference between an asset and a base transaction?
Just the question here in the front was, what's the difference between an asset and a base transaction? With an asset transaction, I forget what the acronym stands for, but with an asset transaction, it's like when you're purchasing something on a website. When two people look at the same item and you say you've only got one in stock and one person puts it in their cart, then you won't let the second person buy it without you'd make sure that if the second person hit the buy button, you first go back and check whether the item has been purchased before notifying the other person. With a base transaction, what you do is you don't care if there's a certain level of it doesn't matter. You let both of them go in and try to buy the thing, and you might come back later and say your transaction has cleared or your transaction didn't. So you won't be with a base transaction. You're going to allow a certain amount of flexibility. And it's like selling about 10% more airline seats than you have on the plane.
I've noted that Z hypervisor seems to be the most adapted virtualization framework. So which virtualization framework are you guys using?
So the virtualization framework that you're talking about is for infrastructure as a service in what we would use within soft layer. And what we're talking about within Bluemix is not we're using the Linux's virtualization capability. So we can run Bluemix on top of any hypervisor. So you could run Cloudfoundry or Bluemix on top of Amazon's infrastructure as a service or Azure's infrastructure as a service, or you can run Bluemix even on your local machine if you've got multiple VMs. Right? You wouldn't be running Bluemix, you'll be running Cloudfoundry. Yeah. It's a question.
So when you spin up a number of containers, the actual underlying VMs, are they single tenancy or are they shared between multiple different users?
The VMs are shared.
So how do you handle sandboxing? I mean, it's pretty easy with using LXC or Docker. All of these things have a lot weaker sandboxing than something like KVM or Zen or anything else like that. How do you ensure that you don't decouple from one container to another? Okay, so if you're concerned about that, what we can do is, so Bluemix offers you a little bit more flexibility. I mentioned to you that for the most part, Bluemix is based on Cloudfoundry, right? But we also within Bluemix offer you the capability to run your own virtual machine. So we give you sort of the infrastructure as a service option if you want it. But when we're looking at the application, from an application point of view, you'll be running multi-tenancy in the fact that multiple applications are sitting within the same container accessing similar services, and your question was really how do you cannot root into that machine. You don't have the ability to go and SSH into the machine or do anything with that machine except access it through the web interface or the command line interface that we provide you.
Sure, but if you're running LXC, there are plenty of attacks that you break out of that sandbox. So my bank is running on Bluemix, and I'm running my app. I may well be able to break into their container. That would be pretty bad for bank stuff. I'm so insecure by default. Kind of feels like a bad stuff.
Well, again, you remember when I talked about systems of record versus systems of engagement? We're not saying that everything is suitable, every application is going to be suitable for this environment. There are going to be some applications that are more suitable for this than other ones. So I promised that I'd show you some of the services that were in Bluemix. The types of things that you want to do. So let me give you one example. Does anyone want to give me their Twitter ID? The Twitter handle to see which celebrity best matches your Twitter handle. No, I want an individual that we know is in the room.
Richard.
Richard. Richard's not giving us the security.
RJD.
This is not your best friend.
KOLB.
So what it's doing, it's analyzing all of RJ. Is that yours, Richard? So all of Richard's tweets against all of the tweets against all the personalities, and according to this, Richard is most similar to Michael Bloomberg. Right? He is curious, easygoing, he's outgoing, sensitive, compassionate. He is, you can also see he's most similar to Snoop Dogg. He's most different to Ariana Grande. Anyone else want to check the Twitter handle out?
That's not you.
DI. No, I'm just doing for anything. Should we guess? Really?
Interesting. I totally trust your system.
But what this is using is the Watson analytics capability, and it's looking at the types of tweets that you're doing and analyzing the information in the tweet. There's another one that's also really cool. It's called Personality Insights, and here what you do is you input text, and it'll analyze the text for you and tell you about that person. Let's just take a famous speech. I think. Does anyone want to take any other speech? Or a text from anyone else that you want to check out?
Something by that dude running for American president. Trump. Give us a Trump quote. It's not going to go well.
Now don't go back to your office and start analyzing your manager's emails or your lover's email. So let's just take. I'm just going to stop here. Take that. No, IBM does not have a political bias. We don't lean Democrat. But there's other things that you can do at Watson. All of these are samples that are running on Bluemix. What you can do is you can use the API to take text from something you're doing. So one of the things one of the examples they talked about was if you're hiring a person into a team, right? You could see how closely he matches the other members of the team. I mean, there are other use cases that are used for dating websites and all the other websites where you're matching people up. There's another cool API in Watson. What it can do is it analyzes the text. It'll pull from the text names of places, venues, organizations, things that you can use in your app. Now, the ability to do all of this with unstructured data is really impactful, and you don't want to write that code. Honestly, you'd much rather be doing something else because that's already been written. Right. So those are all the APIs that you can use, and I think cloud makes all that possible. But we said, this is the last part, and I think I'm over time, right? Am I over? 4 minutes. Okay, so let's go quickly on this one. So this part is most controversial because I know you guys like your own desktop environment, but we're talking about for the cloud, on the cloud. When we looked at cloud developers, lots of them use traditional enterprise applications. So the biggest cloud developers all are Java developers, right? And the case for developing on the cloud is that lots of applications have moved to the web and mobile devices, and all of these applications exist on the cloud. And lots of life cycle capabilities have come onto the cloud. You've got GitHub, you've got Jazz Hub on the cloud, and all of those provide you with all the capabilities that you need. We've also got a an Eclipse-based tool called Orion that sits on the cloud, and we can develop using that. The other biggest piece that we find about the cloud is collaboration, right? I mean, open source is the best example of that. The fact that people around the world develop code together and you've never met half of them. You probably wouldn't want to meet the other half of them. But from a developer's perspective, do you really want to move to a cloud? Most of you like desktop environments, but there is this shift that you can share knowledge on the cloud, and nobody likes to set up their IDEs, right? It just gets painful. You'd rather set up a VM and try to clone the VM, but it's really painful. So when we looked, we are huge contributors to the Eclipse platform. The original Eclipse platform came from IBM. So we're also contributing significantly to this platform, Orion, and this is really being able to do tools on the web for the web. It's fully pluggable, so you can update your code on Orion, deploy directly to Bluemix, and we've got all of that in there. I just want to mention one last thing before I stop, and we have this thing called the Varden Challenge, and let me close this thing up. It's a competition that's being run with this company called Varden, which provides rich UI components. And this competition is sort of an online hackathon that if you're interested in participating in it, there's an Apple Watch or iPads and stuff. You have free access to Bluemix for 30 days, after which you get 375 gigabyte hours of free usage on Bluemix. So you can go and register at this URL. And for this Varden challenge, you can register the one below. Okay, but I wanted to show you one more thing before I get off here and we get into any other questions. This is my code repository. Once I've gone into the dashboard and added a Git repository, I can go in and this is what I will see. I've got and this you've probably seen. I can go in and edit the code, I can track and plan, I can create build, I can create a pipeline, be able to modify the pipelines, change my code. If I go in and edit the code, I can use the online editor. And all of this is integrated because all I have to do is supply that URL from Bluemix. Alternatively, I can import the code into Eclipse and I can create a server, a Bluemix server here, and deploy directly from Eclipse onto Bluemix. So it's all seamlessly, easily integrated, and of course it works with all the other tools as well. And if you really like to use your keyboard because you paid for it, there's command line tools as well.
Guys, we thank you very much.
Thank you.
Really
Thanks so much.